Alright boys, here it is, Whirlwind perfected. I've spent the last 2 days testing every endgame variation of Whirlwind and have landed on the most powerful, the easiest to play and tankiest version of it. And did I mention the highest damage version of it too? We'll be breaking down the skills, the gear and the Paragon board all in this video. There will of course be a link to the build planner down in the description below. And if you found this build useful, if you liked it, don't forget to give the video a like to support the content and maybe subscribe for more Diablo content. So let's jump into the skill tree. Starting things off, you will notice that I have a lot of points in every skill. This is due to my gear, so just kind of ignore that for now. We'll be taking 2 points into lunging strike to unlock the core skill node. We will only be putting 1 point into Whirlwind and then taking enhanced Whirlwind. This is because Whirlwind is just an engine to create dust devils and isn't actually here for damage itself. An enhanced Whirlwind gives us fury, allowing us to sustain this ability for like infinite basically. Pressure point for a source of vulnerability. We have quite a few of these so that we can keep our vulnerable uptime as much as possible. We then have imposing presence and we have martial figure to help with tankiness. We then have tactical rally and cry. This is a source of fury as well as unstoppable and movement speed. Over here then we have also got tactical iron skin. This gives us a huge heal when this goes off as well as a ton of barrier. This is a great skill, really shining actually recently this season. We then also have tactical challenging shout. This is a source of damage reduction as well as a big old source of fury, which is really good. Fury will generate a lot of dust devils through the devilish aspect. That's why you'll see a lot of it in here. We then have power war cry, which is a damage multiplier as well as also a source of berserking, which is something that we're going to want to try and keep up as much as possible. We do juice the shouts here a little bit. We have booming voice for increased duration as well as guttural yell, which gives us a ton of damage reduction. The reason that we're not going for raid leader, which a lot of you may be used to, is that we're getting all of our healing through the iron skin heal, so we don't need this with this build. Down here then we have 3 points into aggressive resistance and prolific fury for damage reduction and also fury generation respectively. There is a reason that I have 1 point in battle feather here. There seems to be some sort of bug that causes it to extend the duration of berserking through either the dust devils or Tyrael's might, something like that. It's kind of a bit buggy, but we're just going to leverage that while we can, because why not? Over here we have Pit Fighter for some increased damage to close enemies as well as some distant damage reduction as well. We do have Slaying Strike here. This is because Whirlwind's biggest weakness is boss damage, and this makes the last 35% of the boss fight go much faster, and that's often the most dangerous point of the fight as well. We have 1 point into thick skin here and then 3 ranks into counter offensive. And then finally in this last little part of the tree here we have Wallop. We will be using a one-handed mace as a dual wield setup, and I'll show you how to set that up in just a second. Wrath the Berserker for our ultimate, and then we're using Unconstrained. Now for our weapon setup, we'll be using dual wield like I said, and it's very important you have a mace as your second offhand so that you can actually use Wallop. Very important that you do that. And then for weapon technique, we have two-handed axe. It's always been the best, 10% damage to vulnerable enemies. That's the one we're going to go for. Now moving on over to the gear. There is a lot of Uber uniques in this version, but I will include a non-Uber version which still does perform really well if you are working towards these still. So as far as the Shaco goes, cooldown reduction is your target for masterworking and greater affix. Over to Tyrael's Might then, you want to try and hit the maximum resist to all elements if you can. Damage reduction isn't terrible either. Now as we move on to gloves, you'll see that some of the gear that I have in game is different from what I recommend in the planner. This is just because I haven't found that gear for myself yet. So the first thing that would be different is that instead of strength, you'll want to have instead chance to make enemies vulnerable. You need as much of this as possible because our vulnerable uptime would otherwise be really bad. Critical strike chance and then critical strike damage damage, with the Masterwork and the Greater Affix priority being on critical strike chance. For our tempers then, you'll want 1 damage while berserking, and you can either have barrier generation if you feel a bit squishy, or you can have concussion instead for better CC on bosses. And then moving on to our pants, we'll be taking Tybalt's Will. We'll have near permanent unstoppable, so we'll always be getting this really juicy damage and damage reduction buff. For your Masterwork and Greater Affix, try and target the all stats if you can. Max resource and damage reduction aren't terrible if you hit those instead. You'll see for our gems, we have gone for amethysts across the board. If you are having trouble with staying alive, swap these out for rubies, or don't even be afraid to go like 50-50 if you want to mix it up. Then moving on to the boots, another piece of gear where I've not quite got the stats I'd actually recommend. For these, I would rather have ranks to Warcry, movement speed, and strength. The tempers, concussion, you can swap this out for barrier if you are finding yourself to be dying too much. And then movement speed is the final one. The Masterworking and the Greater Affixes for this one, again on ranks to Warcry if you can hit it. 3 per second isn't terrible, but definitely Warcry is better here. For the aspect, we've got Ghost Walk. This just gives us an insane amount of movement speed, which again, thanks to our near infinite uptime on Unstoppable, it's just basically a permanent buff. Then moving on to our first weapon. Oh shit, okay, hang on. Oh man, I've got company. Look, check this out. You sniffing the mic, mate? Hey, I'm recording a video, mate. Look at the size of that tail, mate. Come on, get out of here. All right, let's go back to it. Then moving on to the first weapon. For the stats on this one, you're going to want to get strength, max life, critical strike damage. For the tempers, chance for Dust Devils to cast twice, and critical strike damage. For Masterworking, you'll want to try and hit all 3 on chance for Dust Devils to cast twice, with your Greater Affix being on strength, and if you can hit it, critical strike damage too. And then finally for the aspect, we have the Fierce Winds aspect. Now this will actually be on the amulet in the planner. I've had to have it here because I haven't got the right tempers on my next item, which is the one-handed mace. And I'll explain a little bit why that is, because you may choose to set things up the way I have. And first of all, the stats that you have on this one: strength, max life, and crit, with the Greater Affix hopefully being on strength and crit. You will have 1 roll to damage while berserking here as well. This will help cap out your blood rage node. Your blood rage node in combination with the roll that you have on your gloves, and possibly even your ring. Now back to the final one, which is the temper, and this is the reason why I don't have Fierce Winds on the amulet right now. You need to get all 3 of your masterworks on Dust Devil size, and it needs to be a high roll as well. You want it to be in that high 50 range, so that you're getting the most size and most multiplicative damage out of it, because 1% size equals 1% damage because of the Fierce Winds aspect. So you want that to be as close to the cap as possible, which is 100%. For the aspect then, we have the Dust Devils aspect. This is what you would have had on the two-hander if you would put things the way that I have them in the planner. You'll see it in the planner if you're getting confused. And then for the aspect, I have Dust Devils on here, but again, if you have a good roll, refer to the planner for the way that that's set up. We have a Ramladani's Magnum Opus, and for this one, you're going to want to simply try and hit the Masterwork and the Greater Affixes on strength. As far as the most important thing on this weapon, though, it is absolutely the unique effect. I think anything under a 0.4, you should probably not invest in, and try and aim to get one that is. This is by and far the most important part of the weapon. Next, the Grandfather. This is simple and straightforward, a big crit multiplier. You want to try and get your Masterworks and Greater Affix on all stats, with the flat damage being a close second. Starless Skies, and this one, this is huge. Like, this is really, really important for this build because it allows you to do a ton of damage, as well as allowing you to actually keep your Fury up and not run out. You'll want to try and get all 3 Greater Affixes on critical strike chance. Everything else on this piece of gear is pretty useless, so unfortunately, like for me with Lucky Hit, it doesn't really do all that much. Next is a legendary ring. For this one, you'll want to try and hit strength, critical strike chance, and chance to make enemies vulnerable. This is pretty much perfect stats on this one that I've got here. Wrath of the Berserker cooldown, and then damage while berserking. As far as Greater Affix goes, the main priority is critical strike chance, and for Masterworking, you want to try and get as much of that on the Wrath of Berserker temper as possible. And then finally, moving up to the amulet, and my amulet's a bit of a mess, so don't try and copy this one. You're going to want to get critical strike chance as a greater affix. You want to try and get strength, like strength percentage as a greater affix, and you want to try and get counter offensive as a greater affix. This is like by and far the most expensive piece of gear you'll have to deal with. If you don't hit any of them as greater affixes, but you have those stats, that is still an extremely good piece of gear. You're going to have a hard time getting it. Pit Fighter is a good alternative, as you can see that I've got here. If you have enemies are vulnerable, that's fine. It allows you to drop it on another piece of gear. Like, you want 2 of those, so I have it on both my amulet and my ring, but you would usually have it over here on the gloves. But this is just how the cards fell for me. As far as tempers go, Wrath of the Berserker and critical strike damage. And you're going to want to try and get all of your tempers on the passive, which would be counter-offensive or Pit Fighter in my example.
Now, almost forgot about the aspects, so let's just quickly circle around and talk about those real quick. So on the amulet, we have Devilish. This is going to create a Dust Devil every time we generate 100 Fury, which is why you see such a huge focus on Fury generation as well. Bold Chieftains, because we want our shouts to be popping off as much as humanly possible so that we're getting Dust Devils through Fierce Winds, in addition to obviously the effects of the shouts themselves. Then on the one-hander, we have Dust Devils. This creates Dust Devils as you Whirlwind. Now, there's a little pro tip on this one, which can actually help you create more Dust Devils, which is tapping Whirlwind as opposed to holding it down. It's a fucker on the hands, but it, makes your DPS go up. So, it's up to you if you want to do it or not. And then finally, we have Conceited over on the gloves here. We have such huge uptime on Iron Skin that this is like basically a permanent DPS boost for us.
Finally, moving on to the Paragon board, and as always, we'll only really talk around the core parts here, and you can refer to the planner to follow it step by step. In our first board, we have Exploit. Now, you don't actually necessarily need this. I've been speed farming, so I've taken it for damage. If you're hitting that harder content, I'd actually recommend having something like Territorial or Undaunted in here instead for additional damage reduction so that you're not getting slapped around like a little bitch. Then, moving up into the Carnage board here, we're going to have Ambidextrous. It's a dual-wield build. It's a damage multiplier for us. It's juicy. It's lovely. I like it a lot. Then, moving over to the Blood Rage board, we have Blood Rage. Very, very important that you hit this cap of 30%. This is a huge damage multiplier for you. And in this one, we have the Twister node. Now, quick disclaimer, it may be a little bit different in the build planner. I might have updated it since the video came out. I try to keep the planners as up to date as possible, and I don't always release a full video for a minor change. Over onto the Warbringer board here, we have picked up all of the Max Fury nodes because these gives us a nice little damage boosty. We've got Warbringer. This is our source of Fortify for the build. And then we have Aya sat in this node for additional damage while berserking and damage reduction while berserking. Over onto the Bonebreaker board then, we have Wrath. Great little critical strike damage boost and also a Fury regen method as well. Finally, on the Decimator board, we do take the legendary node here for the 2 forms of multiplicative damage. We will be overpowering through Tyrael's Might. Whirlwind as a channeling skill cannot overpower, but Tyrael's Might can, so we are fine there. This will work. And then we have Martial. This is a form of cooldown. Every time we use a shout, it will reduce the cooldown of our Iron Skin and our Wrath of the Berserker by 2 seconds, and that is what is giving us that like near permanent state of Iron Skin and Wrath of the Berserker. But that's the build. Really is like an absolute beast. Barb is not as weak as people are making it out to be. This is an absolutely killer build. If you did enjoy it, again, please do consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel. I'll catch you on the next one. Love ya. Bye.